Christian Weston Chandler, Chris Chan, CPU Goddess Blueheart, Jesus Christ Sonichu Prime. Some call him the most documented man in history. We have watched sanity slip away from his fingers since the first moment he walked onto our screens. Today, Chris believes they are an interdimensional goddess figure, as well as the incarnation of Jesus and the Christian God, with the purpose of bringing about the dimensional merge, so our universe and the universe of all fictional characters may be united, with Chris ruling it all. Today, we are going to take a peek through Christery and examine how these beliefs originated and evolved into what they are today. What sets the bedrock for Chris Chan's God complex is the coddling he received from his mother Barb and his father Bob growing up. They taught Chris to shift the blame for his own actions onto others, and they pampered him as well. There are a plethora of examples of this, especially from Barb throughout Christery. She was his date for the senior prom in high school, and she convinced him that he was a creative genius, and has even physically fought the police for Chris. His parents never instilled any form of independence onto their son either, homeschooling Chris and allowing him to stay at home even into his 30s. They went on to insist he not get a job, in fact, and rely solely on his disability payments. This forms the basis for the massive ego and entitlement that is crucial to Chris's future beliefs. Furthermore, Chris was very much a child raised by video games and TV. He believes the world and people work like how it does in anime. The awkward and often inappropriate interactions between people being how Chris learned to interact with others. He also places himself in the role of the protagonist in every situation. This is the result of such an upbringing. And while the protagonist may struggle and suffer in the first few acts, they succeed and get the girl in the end. Or so Chris had hoped. What would fuel a great portion of Chris Chan's future decisions is his need and obsession for a partner. During the Love Quest saga in his college years, Chris would go around campus with a sign soliciting a relationship, the infamous attraction sign. The dean of the campus, Mary Lee Walsh, would ban him from campus for a year and order a psych evaluation for this and other unhinged actions, cementing her as a cartoonish villain in his life and comic books for decades. The obsession with both sex and an ideal partner is but one of many crucial building blocks in the mental oubliette to come. It is worth mentioning that during his time in college, Chris would create the Sonichu comics, his life's work. This is the inception of the magical world that Chris Chan would long to physically escape into. So much so, he believes it to be a prophecy. Perhaps the earliest example of magical beliefs was in 1992, where a 10-year-old Chris and Father Bob would attend the Leonard Bernstein Symphony Orchestra, a musical event performed by animatronic bear men. During an interactive segment with the cast, Leonard Bernstein himself would ask Chris his name and would mishear it and pronounce it Christian rather than Christopher. Taking this as a sign from God, and with the help of his father, he would legally change his name to Christian. Even in the early days of Chris uploading his life to the internet, we can see a belief in his own magical ability existed. The Kursiehamiha, or sometimes the Shinyehamiha, is a special magical attack Chris Chan performs on innumerable occasions. Inspired by the Kamehameha wave from the Dragon Ball anime series, this move is performed much in the same way, as Chris channels his negative energy to the palm of his hands with each syllable, before releasing it towards the foe in a wave of unseen and unfelt energy. The target has then been subtly cursed with misfortune and terrible luck to come. While some may argue that Chris's delusions came about due to the cruel machinations of trolls, we see here that Chris had grown the seed of what was to come all on his own. This curse is performed upon, as said, those who earn the wrath of Chris Chan, be it trolls, jerk-ops, or mana-jerks. This maneuver allows Chris to feel like he is in control over his world and strike back in an almighty way against those who would bring stress into his life. Alongside the Curse-Ye-Ha-Mi-Ha is the Forgiveness Blessing, where, in his grace, Chris lifts the curse of the copyrighted magical attack. An aspect of reality that Chris Chan has a difficult time understanding and coping with is the concept of death. The many online sweethearts Chris has been trolled by likely help to skew his perception of death, since many of them would suddenly suffer death threats, die, or even be killed off when their character needed to be retired by trolls. All of which Chris believed wholeheartedly to be true at the time. The first example of Chris experiencing actual death firsthand would be in 2006 with the passing of his beloved childhood dog, Patty. Chris described it as his own personal 9/11 at the time. Notably, he would draw Patty in his own fantasy comic book universe, Quickville, so his dog could frolic amongst the characters like Sonichu that Chris liked to draw for all time. Chris believes Quickville to be a sort of true spirit realm where Patty is still alive and loving life. This is the first time we see Chris use his fantasy world as a coping mechanism for death, but it would not be the last. Another example of magical ability from Chris Chan involves more spiritualism and his ability to communicate and interact with the dead. In 2009, with the passing of his aunt Karina, Chris would tell Sarah May, a troll masquerading as an online girlfriend, that once he touched his aunt's hand after she passed, Chris could hear her spirit, along with the spirits of his grandparents and great-grandparents. It should be no surprise that with such a blurred sense of reality that Chris had many imaginary friends that were more than just imaginary to Chris, the earliest of these being Sonichu himself. In a confrontation with the aforementioned Mary Lee Walsh, Chris pretended to be Sonichu to deliver a speech to Mary. Afterwards, he was ordered to get a psychological evaluation. At BronyCon 2017, Chris was seen dancing by himself, or according to Chris, with Magichan, one of his comic book characters. In emails sent in 2010 to Jackie, another gal pal, he claimed to speak physically to Sonichu before bed. The stress of life continued to mount on Chris Chan, from the trolls, to his family's financial problems, to the mounting responsibilities he was unprepared for after his father's passing. Chris would continue to delve deeper into the maladaptive daydreams of his fantasy world. This warped reality would fracture irrevocably with the introduction of the Idea Guys. The Idea Guys were a group of trolls who participated in Chris's fantastical delusions by role-playing as his imaginary friends. The group consisted with at least 5 confirmed members, the one primarily responsible being Joshua Allen Weiss, otherwise known as the Idea Guy. What started off as a simple trolling of Chris Chan preying on his gullibility turned into intense mental coercion and even eventually blackmail for $6,000 at some point. This role-playing took many forms and involved over a dozen characters, including Sonichu and the Quickville version of Chris Chan himself, who urged Chris to convert to Satanism. Chris believed these beings were borrowing Weiss's computer to communicate across dimensions. The Idea Guys crafted many storylines to twist Chris's perception of reality and themselves. Sylvana Rosechu was kidnapped by Payday 2 antagonists. Jamsta Sonichu was arrested for molesting Punchy Sonichu, only to be met by an angry mob outside the courthouse. Quickville itself was occupied by the Russians and the Nazis, going so far as to create Photoshop news clips to convince Chris of the legitimacy of this invasion. Any attempt by Chris to restore Quickville to its original state using his quote-unquote creator power was met with a counterpoint of some other character of the Russians or other OCs that undo all these attempts. Perhaps the most influential of all of Weiss's ideas was the introduction of the lore of Hyperdimension Neptunia, a video game series and anime which parodies the real-life video game industry. In this setting, there are 4 nations representing a video game console. These nations are each ruled by a CPU goddess. Weiss used this lore, suggesting that Chris's Sega Dreamcast contained a portal to Quickville. This resulted in Chris running his console for 24 hours, placing his hands upon it, and feeling a shock. Interpreting this to mean that the Neptunia goddess within was possessing him, this coupled with being in contact with Weiss's CPU goddess personas led to Chris abandoning the Christian religion and converting to Neptunian, since he could actually communicate with the Neptunian goddesses. The idea guys would eventually be ousted by the Kiwi farms after Weiss was doxxed, but their influence remained. One Kiwi farms commenter said, "The idea guy is like glitter. We're going to find bits of him in Chris's ramblings for years." And boy, were they right. With the idea guys gone, Chris became convinced that they themselves were a CPU goddess, and adopted the name CPU Blueheart, the console patron unit goddess of the nations of Quickville and the Commodore consoles. Although the latent god complex had been gestating for some time within Chris, now is the first moment he truly adopted a deific alter ego. Along with this transformation came the Dimensional Merge. Originally a plot point of the idea guys, now it is Chris's version of Judgment Day, where our universe, Dimension 1218, will merge into the universe of Quickville, Dimension C197, which has already merged with all other fictional universes and contains all fictional characters. This merge is Chris's ultimate means of avoiding reality, and it is what he longs for more than anything. In Quickville, Chris is wealthy and loved. No trolls to be seen. He would rather believe in the apocalypse than take the world as it is. Chris tweeted the math of the survivability rates of the dimensional merge written on a McDonald's napkin. While all OCs of C197 are guaranteed to survive, at least 51% of the human population in both dimensions will die, with an 8% margin for error. While he believes billions will die, Chris is certain of his own survival because, and I quote, "He absorbed the spiral seal from his Sega Dreamcast and is a middleman between the 2 dimensions, and when the merge begins, he will gain his full goddess powers, as well as his Sonichu abilities, because he himself is half Sonichu." Well, where did that part come from? Half Sonichu? Well, another concoction of the idea guys is that after his father Bob Chandler died, he reincarnated in Quickville, in his true form, a Sonichu named Robert Chu. Chris believes his father was always a Sonichu, and thus he has latent electric hedgehog potential. Chris explained in the next dozen tweets or so more of the logistics of the merge. Quickville will replace the Fredericksburg area of Virginia near where Chris lives. Superman's metropolis will appear in Delaware, Gotham City in New Jersey, the Smurfs will appear in a forest somewhere in Spain, and so on. Chris has predicted many dates for the merge's beginning to no result, yet he still persists in this belief. After coming to believe in the true, physical existence of Dimension C197, he began to undo the damage of the idea guides to that dimension, and his relationships with the characters there advanced. Being the creator of Sonichu himself, Chris became their father, or sometimes mother. After Chris transitioned to female in the real world, so too did the Chris of C197. In a way, while in his humanoid form he remained male, his Super Sonichu form became female whenever he transformed. Chris C197 got the idea to, use his own semen to impregnate himself, eventually giving birth to twin Sonichu children, Russell Soni and Cynthia Rosie. Chris in the real world would also finally enter into a relationship, a polyamorous one with 5 partners, in fact. It just so happens that these 5 partners are from C197 and Chris can only see them through his third eye. This idea of an interdimensional relationship was started again by the idea guys, but Chris would run with it, adding participants later. He would even enter into a 5-way marriage with these characters. The spouses being Crizel Rosechew, Sylvana Rosechew, Mewtwo from Pokemon, and perhaps the most important spouse, Magichan. There is also Pikachu, a character drawn by Helena Ferenzna, one of, if not the only actual fan of Chris Chan's comics. Although Pikachu is not a confirmed wife, Chris would later recognize her as a prophet of his religion, as well as a member of his harem. Chris would announce that his sweetheart search was over yet again. While people assumed he actually found someone for a time, they were only inside his mind. Chris would begin to soul swap with his psychic-type wife, Magichan, while Chris's soul entered C197. In the video, first recorded statement of Chan Sonichu, August 15th, 2019, Magichan, in Chris's body, tells us the merge is coming, and they are trying to improve the physical mind in Chris's body, as well as an attempt to demonstrate her telekinesis.
Good day, everyone. It is I, Chan Sonichu. I have taken possession of Christine's body, as we have swapped bodies. Her soul is in my body, as you can see right behind me, on the opposite side of the dimension curtain. You could definitely tell that it is I as opposed to Christine, not only in the vocal tones, but also my behavioral patterns. The dimension merge continues to progress. An event will happen very soon where my body fully comes into this 1218 dimension. And I will be swapped back with Christine, and everything will definitely further progress from there. It is quite different being in a human body as opposed to my Sonichu body. Especially in the brain. My brain works a lot better. This brain, it needs work. But I am working on it. I am improving. Well, that aside anyway, still working on it. She's got power. I'm helping her find it. And she's borrowing my power too. She'll be making the journey very soon to progress everything there is. We will all be able to see and coexist with each other very soon. At least at this point, our wisdom, intuition, other thoughts are able to be shared in this realm. So take that as you will. Be good. Be safe.
Magichan remained in Chris's body for exactly 1 month until Chris returned in the middle of September. But despite his growing connection to C-197 and his husbands and wives, they could neither assuage his loneliness or the stress of his life. As with everything else Chris fixates on, the soul swapping became a way to cope with the stresses of daily life. In April 2022, Sonichu himself would swap with Chris, and they would remain as Sonichu for nearly an entire year. Chris initiated this swap in response to missing out on BabsCon 2020, a brony convention that Chris was very much looking forward to attending. It was cancelled thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic. Sonichu, in Chris's body, claimed that Chris was able to attend BabsCon in C-197. Sonichu would remain in the body of Chris until a troll, identifying themselves as a psychic, hosted a number of seances in an attempt to restore Chris to their form. Chris returned to their body following these sessions when the news of My Little Pony G5 was announced. They would then proceed to spend the following months hating on the art style, calling for cancellation and boycotts. While this was the longest possession, it would not be the last. Others include the conjured version of a younger Chris Chan, after reading the Warhol/Chris Chan, a book comparing the life of Chris to the modern artist Andy Warhol. Chris also channeled his own father, now Robert Chu, for a short while as well. Chris's affinity for magic continued to grow, with a large focus on healing abilities. In the time he was possessed by Magichan, he would use their powers to heal with a touch, and would begin to believe in the healing and protective ability of certain stones. Very much buying into New Age beliefs, Chris has a large collection of various polished stones and gems. Chris now adorns themselves in these stones, upon necklaces and rings. He even has a water bottle with an amethyst embedded in the bottom, which he claims is able to keep the water pure. Perhaps the most important crystals are the Gate Crystal and the Celestial Key, two mundane, large pieces of quartz crystal that Chris claims has the ability to open dimensional portals and enhance ones that already exist, and that they are instrumental artifacts in beginning the dimensional merge. They can be activated by sending an electrical shock of a taser into Chris, along with the stones. Now that Chris has embraced a persona of divinity, we need to try to piece together the accompanying creation myth Chris believes resulted in the current state of existence, which is rather difficult, as it involves piecing a lot of small tidbits of information together from various sources, including jailhouse letters, but I'll give it my best shot. In the beginning, there was the Big Bang, and the 1218 and C-197 dimensions were one and the same. Upon this earth was the Garden of Eden, and Adam and Eve left the garden as the dinosaurs were falling to extinction, and then they became the first cavemen of the prehistoric period. Time went on, and Eden separated from the rest of Pangaea to become its own isolated island, and Chris was there for all of it, as the interdimensional goddess figure ruling over it all. Chris has had many incarnations throughout this time, sometimes simultaneously. During the time of King Arthur's court in the 14th century, Chris existed as their incarnation Sylvia the Magician, reigning over all existence of both mortal men and OCs past and future. There existed 3 mages, one of dark magic, one of light, and the eldest that sat between. The eldest being Merlin the Wizard. At Chris's instruction, they conducted a ritual to separate the dimensions. They were sealed behind the Iron Curtain, and the population split between dimensions by its mystical barrier of force, distance, and magic. Eden would fade from the memories of mankind that were left behind in Dimension 1218, although the ritual could not remove the impression the beings we call fictional characters left on the collective psyche of mankind. And so, over the years, in the form of OCs and media, they were recreated. But this grand spell held a caveat. Hundreds of years from that point, the dimensions would recombine as one, and magic would return, although many will die in the process. In the final moments of this spell's casting, Chris and Merlin came to an accord. Chris would one day return to Dimension 1218, and Merlin would be the eternal caretaker of his soul and the majority of his magical power. Chris was banished to Universe C-197 until the year 1982. Chris's soul would travel from the future back in time to this point, utilizing the power of the chaotic rainbow, created the moment a Pikachu strikes Sonic with electricity, birthing Sonichu in the process. The portion of Chris's soul that returned to 1218 in that moment flew into the womb of Merlin's current incarnation, Barb Chandler, and in time, Chris would restore Eden through the dimensional merge. Now, make no mistake, this is not how Chris has or would probably describe their beliefs in full, but it is the best interpretation I could make from years of sporadic revelations revealed to Chris in his meditations, quote-unquote, and the retconning and story changing Chris does certainly didn't make it any easier. We're finally at that point again. August 2021, Chris Chan is arrested with a charge of incest with his mother. There is some speculation, as it has never been fully confirmed, but it is very likely Barb has dementia and Chris raped her. It is important to bring this up in this video, since in the early days before and after the arrest, Chris would describe what he did with his mother as a soul bonding, which had the effect of healing her and extending her lifespan. In a call Chris made before he was arrested to the troll Isabella Janke, Chris discusses how he was very pent up leading up to the moment he engaged with Barb and was in need of release. It's hard to make out, but he states that everything on this side of the Iron Curtain was in a good alignment leading up to it. Furthermore, he elaborates that the Christian God revealed to him that incest is okay. Chris Chan's God complex has become both reason and excuse for him to do some of the most evil and sick acts known to man, and with recent developments that we'll speculate on towards the end of the video, I truly shudder to think of what he will do in the future. Chris spent the next year and a half behind bars, which only had the effect of worsening his already delusional state. Chris's fantasies are always affected by the media he is consuming, and the only books he seems to have read in prison were the Bible. Chris concluded that he himself is the goddess Emmanuel, Chris's term for the Christian God at the moment, as well as Jesus Christ of Nazareth reborn. In the many letters Chris wrote in jail that were released to the public, we see that he has begun writing in an old English style of prose to better fit this new persona. He would rage against those who had betrayed him, causing him to be arrested for what he did to his mom, and using his savior status to justify his actions and claim no wrongdoing, even to deny it ever happened at all despite his previous confessions. Chris's God complex, much like his Electric Hedgehog Pokemon, had evolved into a Messiah complex, meaning he believes that they are or will become a savior. Both, technically, since he claims to have died on the cross for our sins already, and the merge is a great salvation in his eyes. In this moment, Chris dubbed himself the Real Player One, effectively deciding he is the center of the universe, and no one else really is a legitimate person. After release, Chris would return to the internet and conduct a live stream, which was half performing song parodies and the other half conducting a sermon-like announcement of his return, treating it almost like a divine miracle.
Yay and merrily to everyone. Welcome to this. That song you just heard, that was dedicated to all the lingering and lost toxic haters fakers and darkest sinners that came from the 1218 half of our Earth that has been bugging us for the longest of time. And why are they still lingering? You're not supposed to be doing that. Come on, get out of the picture already. You're long gone. Anyway, yes. With the ultimate miracle chaos control, I ascend and make my return to the internet in all that is good and well-being. I am divine and connected to everything, and I know and not know at the same time, between the consciousness, the subconsciousness, and the unconsciousness. I know all, I see all, I foreknow all, I've been there, done that, everything. So now, with that, we're still amidst our dimension merge completion and the moment of Futurast, as you shall learn shortly enough with the events that happened back in late February 2006. But for now, we are on the road.
This new religious fervor is where we find Chris Chan today, and his ever-growing, ever-nonsensical mythology is still a reflection of his narcissism and ego. Worst of all, the story isn't over yet. At the time of this video's creation, Chris Chan has alluded to getting his girlfriend Flutter pregnant. More on her in a video I made a while back, link in the description if you want to see. If Chris has a child and is a part of its life, it's obvious that they will be part of their self-insert religion. Ever since they were a young man, they prophesied that they were meant to have a daughter named Crystal. And sickeningly enough, it isn't hard to imagine Chris abusing any child they have in the same way he abused his mother. Tell me what you think about all of this in the comments below. I appreciate the growing community I have on this channel, and sharing these people's lives together is very rewarding. Oh, and like and subscribe. I'm supposed to remind people to do that. As always, thank you for watching The Bazaar.